Mafia the Old Country released roughly 9 years after Mafia 3, and it had a lot to make up for, as the third game in the series had a lot of shortcomings and a lot of negative reviews. So, has the most recent Mafia game outperformed 3? Well, I'd say so, otherwise you'd never hear the end of it. But what did Mafia the Old Country do well? What could it have done better? Well, we'll be talking about all of that in today's video, as well as breaking down the story and its characters. The story of Mafia the Old Country follows Enzo, a boy who was sold into slavery at the age of 5 and forced to work in the sulfur mines in Sicily. After a string of bad luck, Enzo finds himself on the run from the Spredato family. He is nearly caught, but manages to escape by crossing into the territory of another mob family, who scares off his pursuers. It's here that Enzo catches the attention of Luca, one of the men working for this other family. Rather than killing or turning away, Luca takes an interest in the boy, which leads to him bringing him to the Torrisi estate, where he will spend his years working and slowly proving his worth. Eventually, Enzo earns enough trust to be invited into the family and officially becomes a member of the Mafia. As Enzo continues to prove himself within the family, cracks begin to form. The biggest problem comes when he falls in love with Isabella Torrisi, the Don's daughter. The two keep their relationship secret as tensions rise between the Torrisis and the Spredato families. What starts as hostilities eventually turns into all-out war, costing many lives. The most impactful loss being Luca, the man who brought Enzo into the family and acted as a father figure to him. After Luca's death, Don Torrisi becomes colder and more ruthless. He sends Enzo on a mission to eliminate the remaining leaders of the rival family. A job that feels less like a promotion and more like a death sentence. Before leaving, Enzo discovers that Isabella is pregnant with his child. From this moment on, Enzo's priorities begin to shift. For the first time, he seriously considers leaving the Mafia behind and starting a life with Isabella. Enzo would go on this mission to get rid of the people who betrayed Don Torrisi, and he would be successful, if not destroying an entire theater in the process. Okay, it wasn't fully destroyed, but they definitely ruined the night for some people. Once Enzo returned, he would start to plan his escape to escape the Mafia. Eventually, when the time was right, Enzo would attempt to escape with Isabella, but their plan is discovered.
Leaving without saying goodbye.
Enzo!
I always knew you were trouble, Caruso. Now you're gonna get what's coming to you.
Get your hands off me!
And he's not the only one. Why don't you call and tell us about your dirty little secret? It broke your father's heart. So much for the sanctity of the confessional, huh?
You bastard! Let her go!
But your sins may yet be absolved. Your father's made arrangements.
No, no, no!
Pick it up. I said, pick it up. Get him out of here.
Enzo, I love you!
I'll find you! I'll find you!
The Don sees Enzo's desire for freedom as an act of betrayal.
I'll tie his fucking hands! Don Torrisi. I love it. I welcome you into my family. And you betray me from the start. Are you a man? Put up your hands! You think I would allow it? Huh? Caruso! That you ruin her! Isabella will marry who I tell her to marry. The new Baron Fontanella, and she will live happily ever after. Because I have a doctor that will wipe every trace of you from this earth. Understand?
But Isabella is...
You shut up!
I beg you, don't Tracy, please!
He was a member of a brotherhood, now he's nothing. If rules aren't upheld, what use are they? You show me you have what it takes. You wanna be someone? You take your knife and end him. Cut his fucking throat.
Enzo and Don Torrisi would eventually end up in a knife fight where only one man would escape. And that man is Enzo. Killing Don Torrisi finally breaks the chain that has imprisoned him since childhood. However, Enzo's fight for freedom doesn't end there. After sparing a former friend earlier in the story, the same man ultimately betrays him.
Just you and me. Like we said. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Enzo is ambushed and killed, dying not as a loyal soldier of the family, but as a man who will never get to experience his true freedom. Although his story ends on a somber tone, at least Isabella would get to leave with her child.
Amore mio, we'll remember today for the rest of our lives. It's the day we chose a future for our family. My father left me for dead. Our child will live how they choose. Just knowing that makes everything we've been through worthwhile. I can't undo my past, but you helped me to rise above it. And for that you have my love, my loyalty, forever. Enzo.
The story of Mafia the Old Country is about a man who spent his entire life fighting for freedom, only to achieve it in the briefest of moments before his death. Enzo being the protagonist means he probably has the most to talk about. First things first, Enzo's entire character is about being imprisoned. He never is truly free for most of his life. The freest he possibly ever was when he was first brought to Torrisi's estate, but he lost it all again when he agreed to join their life of crime. He just didn't know it. But the other side of this is the fact that he has an innate ability to fight back against being imprisoned, instead of accepting it. When he was enslaved in the mines, himself and his friend Gaetano spent years saving money to buy their way out. When everything fell apart, Enzo didn't give up. He fought his way out instead. Later, when he found himself stuck in the mob life he no longer wanted, he did everything he could to escape it. not just for himself, but for the people he cared about. Even in his final moments of the game, he's still fighting for his freedom and for the safety of the woman who will become the mother of his child. Another defining part of Enzo's character is his passion and his unshakable optimism and kindness. Enzo feels things deeply. One of the very first things we see from him is his compassion. In the mines, he goes out of his way to help someone who was being bullied. That one act of kindness makes him a target, and in a way, it sets the entire story into motion. We also get to see a little bit of his optimism, which I believe he gets a little bit from his friend from the mines, as they kind of lift each other up. Enzo constantly believes things will get better or work out for him, and in a lot of ways they do. But some things are just out of his reach. The biggest thing being his relationship with Isabella. He believes if he proves himself to Don Torrisi that he will be accepted, that he could have a relationship with her. But in reality, he was never truly one of them. We can see this at the end of the game when Don Torrisi calls him a Caruso, which was an old term for boy, but was used at the time as an insult for slave boys in the sulfur mines. Another important part of Enzo's character is his loyalty, or rather who he's actually loyal to. Enzo was never truly loyal to Don Torrisi. His loyalty was to Luca and Isabella. Luca was in many ways the father figure Enzo never had. He advised him, protected him, and genuinely wanted what was best for Enzo. We know this because the last thing Luca ever says to Enzo is to leave if he can. And Enzo listens. He takes Luca's advice over the vow he made to the family, proving exactly where his loyalty always belonged. Enzo's story is a tragedy from the very beginning. A boy spending most of his life in chains, spending his entire life fighting for freedom he was never allowed to have. He escaped the mines, survived the Mafia, proved himself time and time again, not because he wanted power, but because he wanted a life he could finally call his own. What makes Enzo such a great protagonist isn't his strength or his skill or even his determination. It's his heart, his compassion, his belief that things could someday be better, and in the end, that's the very thing that kills him. Because there's no room for these traits in this sort of life. He dies betrayed by a man he spared, a man who was his friend, and one he showed mercy to, even when that friend was trying to kill him. But that's what makes Enzo different from everyone around him. Even after a lifetime of imprisonment, manipulation, and violence, he never let the world turn him into the monster, even if it did influence him from time to time. He always stayed truly to who he was. Enzo dies fighting for freedom, love, and a future he never gets to see. And while his story ends in tragedy, it ends on his terms. Not as property, not as a Caruso, and not as anyone's tool. He dies as what he always wanted to be. A free man. Isabella is the love interest to Enzo, and her character arc is also about being imprisoned. She has grown up in a life of luxury, sure, but she recognizes that luxury comes from a place of malice, and in reality she has no say in what her life actually can be. She spends most of her life under supervision, and is not allowed to make her own decisions. Her cage is one of social expectations. This can be seen with her arranged marriage. She's a pawn to her father. So when Enzo appeared, he offered her something new. And Enzo being himself, he stands out with his remark about how, although he can't choose what he does, he can still choose who he can be. Enzo shows her that even though you might be in a situation you're not happy with, you can still choose to be kind or choose to be however you want to be. Her love for him was also another way for her to rebel against her father. Isabella takes a lot of chances when they arise to defy her father's authority. And ultimately, the thing that pushes her to leave her family entirely is her pregnancy and Enzo's support. During all of this, though, her rebellion is very passive. The moment when she truly fights back is when Enzo is taken away and her child is in danger. She goes from just running away to fighting back. And she actually kills for the first time. Even with the shock of taking a life, though, she does something that normally drives me insane in a lot of media. She drops her knife, but she picks it up again. She has some common sense. She felt her feelings for a few seconds and then went straight back into escaping. She then also kills Tino, which, good, he deserves it. And although she survives, she is permanently scarred from that life. And she leaves alone. She gets her freedom but loses everything and everyone except for her child. Compared to a lot of other love interests, she's actually a nice middle ground. She isn't a helpless damsel in distress, but she isn't a badass either. She's human, and that's what makes me really like her character. She isn't my favorite character of all time, but she is far from hated. Don Torrisi is easily one of my favorite characters in the entire Mafia series, excluding the protagonist. And the reason for this is simple. He's very clearly a bad man, and the game never tries to hide it. In many Mafia games, the Don you work under is memorable, but often outshined by rivals or larger antagonists. Don Torrisi doesn't have that problem. He's constantly menacing. Even when you're in his good graces, there's this lingering feeling that you don't belong, that you're being tolerated, not trusted. Torrisi values power and control above everything else. On the surface, he can appear reasonable. He doesn't want unnecessary war, and he understands the cost of open conflict. But the moment his power is threatened through the death of Luca and the pressure from the rival family, he doesn't hesitate to embrace violence. Peace was never his moral choice, it was simply convenient. Don Torrisi is also deeply paranoid. He doesn't trust many people, and the one man he seemed to genuinely respect was Luca. Luca wasn't just an underboss, he was the Don's voice of reason, and one of the only people who could challenge him without consequences. After Luca's death, the balance disappeared. All Torrisi had left was his nephew Cesare, and then this snake. Anyways, Cesare clearly doesn't hold the same influence or moral weight that Luca once did. Without Luca, the Don's worst traits rise to the surface. His greed, his cruelty, and his willingness to sacrifice others for personal gain. We see this most clearly in how he treats Enzo. Torrisi sends Enzo on a mission that feels less like a test of loyalty and more of a death sentence. And the moment Enzo steps out of line, the moment he acts on his own values, Torrisi has no hesitation in ordering his death. Enzo was never family. He was a tool. That becomes even clearer in how Torrisi treats his daughter. He completely disregards what Isabella wants, proving that even blood doesn't matter to him. If it threatens his control, it needs to be gone. That alone cements him as a true villain. And then there's the mine. Giving Enzo control of the sulfur mine is one of the cruelest things Torrisi does. He knows exactly what Enzo suffered there. He claims to oppose the practice, just hands it to Enzo anyways once it's under his control. Not as a reward, but as a reminder. Sure, Enzo could improve conditions, but at the end of the day, the people working there are still slaves. It's the final proof that Torrisi doesn't care about morality, only about ownership, which can be seen with his inability to let Enzo go. Even when it makes sense to leave. He personally went into an unstable mine during a volcanic eruption just to get to Enzo, and he refused to leave until he knew Enzo was dead, sacrificing countless men just for this one guy. It's the ultimate thing that undoes him, his inability to let things go. When it comes to Mafia characters, Don Torrisi really stands out to me. A big reason for that is the contrast between him and Enzo. One represents love while the other represents control. Their conflict isn't just personal, it's ideological. What I also really appreciate about Don Torrisi as a character is that the game never tries to soften him. He is a hard man. He isn't charming, he isn't misunderstood, he doesn't have some tragic excuse that explains his actions. He's exactly who he presents himself to be. A man driven by power, ownership, and authority. And even when he does try to hide it, it's just underneath the surface. It's not hard to see. And because he's so consistent and unapologetic about it, he becomes far more threatening. There's no illusion that he'll change, no moment where you believe mercy might win out. Don Torrisi doesn't pretend to be anything more than what he is. And that honestly makes him one of the most effective antagonists in the series. Oh, Luca. He is one of the best parts of this game. He is the one true ally Enzo has through and through. He is the one who sees Enzo and takes pity on him, convincing the Don to let him come back to the estate and work as a farmhand. Luca is an idealized version of the Torrisi family values, not how they are practiced, but as they are meant to be. Luca walks that fine line of order without cruelty, which can be seen with the way he handles his extortions. He understands that violence isn't necessarily needed if you know how to play the game.
The farmer here, he has a son. In front of him, he's too proud to give up what he owes right away, but he always pays. So I give him a little back and forth.
This again. So, what do?
We let him act tough in front of the boy.
And then we remind him of his obligations.
Yours is unloaded. You give him a chance to be brave. And then, you let him see it.
He also understands the power he has, and he never abuses it, showing great restraint on his behalf, which is ideal for his role as the underboss. He is perfect in his job. He doesn't seek glory, he just wants to keep living his life. He tends to clash the most with his counterpart, Tino. Tino believes fear creates stability, and Luca believes restraint preserves it. Luca is interesting as he makes it clear that he went through a dark stage in his life. He implies that he knows what it means to be angry and violent, and he found his way back from that, which allowed him to be the man we see. Luca plays a big part in molding Enzo into the man he will become. He leads by example, inspiring Enzo with his demeanor and the way he doesn't have to use violence to get his way, most of the time. But besides inspiring Enzo, he actively looks out for him. He is the first to warn Enzo not to be seen with the Don's daughter, as if rumors start, it could lead to his death. The moment when the family was truly doomed was after Luca's death. Yes, there was the war, but in reality, the thing that really killed the family is the fact that he wasn't there anymore to be the voice of reason. Tino was able to encourage the Don to be more violent and less controlled. We can also see how good of a guy Luca truly was. The last thing he ever does is try and protect Enzo by telling him to leave if he ever is able to. He knows where this life leads to. And as he lied there dying, he probably just thought of all of his regrets. And the only thing he could do was try and spare the one person who was following in his footsteps. Okay, let's talk about Tino. The dick. Tino is literally one of the foulest people you'll interact with in this game. Everything about this man is unpleasant. He embodies every negative side of the Mafia. When we first meet him, he is suspicious of Enzo, and is instantly condescending, and does not hide his disdain. He is also one of the first to send Enzo on a dangerous mission by himself. Similar to other members of the family, Tino is extremely loyal to a fault. However, he tends to lead via fear. He has no issues executing his own men, and has a habit of pretty extreme violence. The worst act that he does though is when he is trying to force Isabella to get rid of her child. He insults her and has no regard to her actual wishes. This, however, would ultimately lead to his death. Tino has a habit of underestimating people, and he underestimated Isabella, which allowed her to get the jump on him, and he got exactly what he deserved. I liked Tino as a character as he is definitely a lot more sinister. He kind of just lurks in the background waiting for Enzo to mess up. And he's also the one who figures everything out that happened with Isabella and Enzo, and their plan to leave. He makes a very good villain. Okay, time to talk about Caesar. Caesar is a true believer in the Mafia way of life. Like, he indulges massively in the perks of this way of life and what it has to offer. He's also very insecure. There are hints of this throughout the story early on. He constantly brags about his endeavors, whether that be violent ones or passionate ones with women. He also doesn't hesitate to tell people that the Don is his uncle. He's also very impulsive when we first meet him. His first thought is usually violence, but he normally gets put down by Luca for this thinking. He's also massively jealous of Enzo. Enzo, unlike him, is an outsider. Not just that, but someone at the bottom of the food chain. At first, Caesar acts like a guide, as Enzo could be someone who looks up to him and be his sidekick. But things change once Enzo starts to outshine Caesar. He starts to get jealous, which is very noticeable after the death of Luca. He starts talking about how he will need to be more serious due to his new responsibilities. He also talks about how it will be himself and Enzo in charge at the end of the day. He still sees Enzo as a friend, but we see that he is suspicious and jealous when Enzo starts disappearing for long periods of time, and most notably when Enzo was sent out on his secret mission to take out Raphael Fontaelli and Don Galante. I probably just butchered those names so bad, but it's the best I can do. He most likely started to feel left out, and that Enzo was being given more trust than him, when in reality that mission was probably given to him due to his expendability. All of this accumulates right up to the end of the game, when he finds out that Enzo betrayed their code and wanted to leave. He loses it. It's a combination of his jealousy of Enzo gaining the trust and respect that he wants for himself, and Enzo choosing to betray that. Because in his eyes, Enzo is basically spitting on everything his family gave him. He is hurt, and yes, angry, but you can still tell he's hesitant to kill Enzo, especially when he is ordered to do it. But at the end of the day, he would have done it if things didn't go south. Now it's time to talk about Caesar's biggest impact on the story, the end. He is spared by Enzo after their fight, and reappears after Don Torrisi's death. Then they have this moment.
Just you and me. Like we said.
I'm sorry.
Now, although upsetting, Caesar's betrayal isn't random. It comes from years of conditioning. Yes, Enzo is his friend, but Caesar is loyal to the Mafia way of life, and Enzo is doing everything against that. So it makes sense that he would act on this instinct, to protect his way of life. Even if Enzo didn't directly threaten that, it still could have been a problem. With the Don out of the way and everyone above him dead, he is next in line. He is in charge. But how would it look if his men realize that he let Enzo live? Is he weak? Can they leave whenever they want? And so on. So I view this moment as Caesar ultimately choosing the life of the Mafia over his friend. I do believe that Caesar might regret his decision, or at the very least, regret that he had to do it. We can also see that he did it for himself and the way of the Mafia, as he lets his cousin leave. She wasn't a member, and in reality had no personal stake in keeping her there. When it comes to companions in a Mafia game, Caesar is pretty good. He's cocky, arrogant, and jealous, but you do feel those moments of bonding between Enzo and himself. Whether that be during the races, surviving, or heisting. Now, I could talk about the villains of this story, but there's really not much to say about them. The other families aren't really the main focus. Yes, you deal with them, you fight them, but the story focuses mainly on the Torrisi family. And honestly, I wouldn't say they're the villains. Yes, they do horrendous things, but they aren't necessarily the villains, if you get what I'm saying. So I'm just going to leave them. We don't know too much about them, and honestly, I find the rest of the cast more interesting. And Don Torrisi and Tino are villains enough to me. Before we go on to the strengths and weaknesses, I first want to talk about the return of Leo. He actually plays a decent role in this game. Leo was introduced to Enzo and they got along really well. They would do many jobs together, and he is always there, whether in the background or standing right beside Enzo. His biggest moment is when his grandfather died and he was given more responsibility. And his second most impactful moment is the fact that he organizes Enzo's escape from Sicily, even though doing so made him an accomplice. After everything goes down, most notably the volcano eruption, he would decide that it was time to leave Sicily. And well, the rest of his story plays out during the other Mafia games. Okay, strengths. Let's start with the obvious one. The story is this game's main focus, and the developers fully commit to that mindset. Instead of filling the game with side quests and unnecessary open world content, they chose to focus almost entirely on the narrative. And that was absolutely the right call. This has always been one of the biggest strengths of the Mafia franchise. Just look at Mafia III. The game received a lot of criticism, mainly due to the repetitive side missions and bloated open world structure. But if you strip all that away and focus purely on the story being told, it's actually really quite enjoyable. Those extra systems were what dragged the experience down. With Mafia the Old Country, it's clear the developers learned from this mistake and doubled down on what worked best: the storytelling. Another major strength is the voice acting. Every performance feels natural and believable. Every character's line delivery feels grounded and human, which is extremely important for any story-driven game. The protagonist is also really great, which is impressive when you consider how different Enzo is compared to previous Mafia leads. That said, every Mafia protagonist tends to be unique in their own way, and Enzo fits right into that tradition. If I had to compare him to anyone, he's probably the closest to Tommy Angelo from the original game, mostly due to their shared connection to racing and their more grounded personality. Another thing that's done really well is blurring the lines between ally and enemy. I also really liked how this game handled Enzo's lack of choice into joining this sort of life, who, unlike the previous protagonists, could have chosen a different path for themselves. Enzo starts off as a slave with no future, and that sense of inevitability hangs over the entire story. Let's talk about transportation, starting with horses. Honestly, horses are far more versatile than I expected, and I often preferred using them whenever the option was available. They handle well, they're fast, and their speed boost mechanic makes them incredibly useful for getting around quickly. I also appreciate the detail between regular horses and the race horses, with the race horses having noticeably better stamina. I also like that you can decorate them. Now, cars. I was genuinely curious how the game would handle the realism when it comes to early vehicles, especially the fact that cars back then had to be hand cranked to start. And honestly, they introduced this mechanic perfectly. They show you how annoying and impractical it is, and then quickly get rid of it by having cars just kind of left running. It's a funny solution when you think about it though. Like, what's stopping someone from stealing their car? And how cheap was fuel back then that everyone just leaves their car running? But from a gameplay perspective, it works really well. It keeps the realism without making the game frustrating and kind of stopping impactful moments by your character having to quickly run to the front of the car to start it. And on top of that, vehicle customization is surprisingly solid, especially considering the time period and technical limitations. But I definitely just kind of favored the race car and drove that everywhere. Combat is another strong point, even if it's a bit dated. Firefights play like a traditional cover-based shooter, very similar to the Mafia Definitive Edition. While that style isn't exactly modern anymore, it works here. Staying out of cover for too long will absolutely get you killed, which forces you to think tactically, waiting for reloads, watching enemy movement, and choosing the right moments to push. Aiming isn't easy either, especially on console. Gunfights feel tense and restrictive, but that actually adds to the immersion, I'd say. Weapons aren't super accurate, and mistakes are punished quickly, which feels appropriate for that era. It can be frustrating at times, but it makes the shootouts more engaging overall. Stealth is also present as an option. It's not perfect, and I'll get into that more in the weaknesses, but I appreciate that it's here and it's usable. Now, my favorite part of the game. Knife fights. These duels were easily the most intense moments for me. They were also the hardest. I constantly struggled to remember which buttons did what, but that difficulty made them feel personal. The knife fights slow everything down. They allow for banter, tension, and one-on-one confrontations where the final blow actually feels meaningful, which a lot of games struggle with, especially when guns are involved. Every duel feels earned, and not just another combat encounter. I also like the fact that you can just kind of customize your knife to how you play, whether that be that you just want to snipe someone with a knife across the room, or you want to loot people automatically. Whatever your preference is, you'll be able to do it. Finally, the racing. I won't lie, I was nervous they were going to recreate the pain of the original Mafia races, where coming first felt borderline impossible. Thankfully, that's not the case here. The races are challenging, but fair. And they're genuinely fun instead of frustrating. Now let's talk about the environment. The environment overall is quite enjoyable, and you can definitely take a step back and just kind of admire how everything looks. But with it being set in the past, there really isn't that much outside of the settlements to really look at. It's still a very nice landscape, and the volcano is just kind of an overlooming presence, which you feel throughout the entire game, and it really comes to light when the volcano starts to erupt. Another benefit was that the game doesn't rely on players having to play the other games to enjoy it. It's a self-contained story. There are hints to other Mafia games though, for the few of us who have played those. Most notably the return of Leo, and also a very familiar looking building that we see in the beginning of Mafia 2. Okay, let's talk about some of the weaknesses. Now, although I've been praising this game a lot, most of that praise is due to the story, not really the gameplay. I'll start with my complaints on the story first. Now, although I loved this story, it was pretty predictable in some ways, most notably when Enzo wrote a letter to Isabella. At that moment, I knew he was dead, and there were just a few things that were pretty predictable that played out. This didn't take away from my personal experience though, but it was definitely something I took note of. Another thing that was a little sad was how short the game felt. I think a large part of that is due to the lack of action. The game takes a very slow approach to everything, and the action doesn't really kick in until a few hours of playtime, which can make the pacing feel a bit odd. Sometimes it feels slow, and sometimes it seems fast. Another big downside is once you finish the story, there really isn't much else to experience. It's pretty lackluster. You can check out the map, drive around, and collect the collectibles, but besides that, there's nothing really else to do. There are some side missions you can do, and do some racing, but they aren't really shown to you. And you can see this with people asking this exact question online. What can you do in Freeride, which is basically what this outside the story mode is? And sadly, the answer is not much. Something else that bothered me a little was that once you complete the game, you can replay chapters, but you can't customize Enzo freely, or be a little mental with it. I think it would be really cool if you had Enzo working the mines but with a full mustache and a suit, because it doesn't really matter seeing as you have finished the game once before. You should be able to come back and have some fun. Now, although the gunplay is enjoyable, it's definitely a little dated with its cover-to-cover model, which is realistic in some ways, but in other ways it kind of feels like it's restricting you on what you can do. The controls are also very similar to the older style of games, going with an unusual layout. It's not unplayable, but it does take a couple of minutes to get used to. Something else that sucked was that you don't really have the opportunity to use every gun. I know I wish that I could have used more of the guns throughout the story, or, use one more than the other. And sadly, you can't really do too much with the guns in Freeride. This also comes into the fact that the game does have a very limited replay value. Yes, the story is good, and I'd probably play it again in the future, but in reality, there's not much reason to. You don't have many chances to approach things differently or to roleplay, which is a little sad. You mostly have the ability to replay the game just to try out using different weapons. Another thing that comes to mind revolves around the knife fights. Some of them just don't make sense. I know it's a game and you got to have a little bit of disbelief, but you're telling me you have a guy who has Enzo dead to rights, who wants him dead, and he just throws down his gun to get into a knife fight. I'm not super sure about that. It is also a bit strange just how often it happens, where people don't jump in. I'm sure it's probably an honor thing, but, fight smarter, not harder. I will say they do try to write into the story, it just happens a bit too much in my opinion. Something they introduced and then never really utilized was the collectibles. This includes the photography and other things like the shrines. But you don't really get the chance to interact with them because the story is so linear. You can't explore to check them out unless you're in Freeride, which doesn't have many activities all over the map to encourage exploration. Now for a slightly funny issue I had with this game that only a few people may relate to. In one mission you are tasked with finding a man in a red vest. And as someone who is colorblind, I spent around 30 minutes searching the entire market trying to find this one guy. And even when I thought I had found him, it wasn't him. Not a serious negative, but a funny one, if not a little annoying at the time. Mafia the Old Country, without a doubt, is a solid and playable entry in the franchise. especially when you consider the backlash that followed Mafia III. The circumstances surrounding this game were pretty clear. Hangar 13 had two options. Either drop the ball again and potentially damage the franchise beyond repair, or release a game that refocused on what Mafia does best: story, characters, and atmosphere. And I'd say they landed firmly in the second category. Is this game perfect? No. It has its predictable story beats, dated gameplay system, and limited replay value, but what it sets out to do, it does well. The developers clearly learned from past mistakes and chose to prioritize narrative over bloated open-world mechanics, and that decision alone elevates the experience. Considering its relatively modest budget, Mafia the Old Country delivers a surprisingly strong story, memorable characters, and a grounded, emotional-driven protagonist in Enzo. The game understands that not every Mafia story has to be about a power fantasy. Sometimes it's just about survival, loss, and an illusion of freedom. I'll admit I may be biased because I love the Mafia series, but even if you're coming into this game as a newcomer, there's still plenty here to appreciate. If you were looking for endless content or a sandbox experience, this game probably wasn't for you. But if you wanted a focus on a well-written story and interesting characters, Mafia the Old Country is absolutely worth experiencing.